Section 15 of Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leonard Wilson. Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 2, Section 15. Excerpts from Antar. Antar, about 550 to 615, by Edward S. Holden. Arabia was opened to English readers first by Sale's translation of the Koran in 1734, and by English versions of the Arabian Nights from 1712 onward. The latter were derived from Galland's translation of the 1001 Nights, which began to appear in French in 1704. Next to nothing was generally known of Oriental literature from that time until the end of the 18th century. The East India Company fostered the study of the classics of the extreme Orient, and the first Napoleon opened Egypt. His savants marched in the center of the invading squares. The flagship of the English fleet, which blockaded Napoleon's army, carried an Austro-German diplomatist and scholar, Baron von Hammer-Purgstall, part of whose mission was to procure a complete manuscript of the Arabian Nights. It was then supposed that these tales were the daily food of all Turks, Arabians, and Syrians. To the intense surprise of von Hammer, he learned that they were never recited in the coffee-houses of Constantinople, and that they were not to be found at all outside of Egypt. His dismay and disappointment were soon richly compensated, however, by the discovery of the Arabian romance of Antar, the national classic hitherto unknown in Europe, except for an enthusiastic notice which had fallen by chance into the hands of Sir William Jones. The entire work was soon collected. It is of interminable length in the original, being often found in 30 or 40 manuscript volumes in quarto, in 70 or 80 in octavo. Portions of it have been translated into English, German, and French. English readers can consult it best in Antar, a Bedouin romance, translated from the Arabic by Terrick Hamilton, in 4 volumes octavo, London, 1820. Hamilton's translation, now rare, covers only a portion of the original, and a new translation, suitably abridged, is much needed. The book purports to have been written more than 1,000 years ago, in the golden prime of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, 786 to 809, and of his sons and successors, Amin, 809 to 813, and Mamun, 813 to 834, by the famous Asmai, born 741, died about 830. It is, in fact, a later compilation, probably of the 12th century. Baron von Hammer's manuscript was engrossed in the year 1466. Whatever the exact date may have been, it was probably not much later than A.D. 1200. The main outlines of Antar's life are historical. Many particulars are derived from historic accounts of the lives of other Arabian heroes, Duraid and others, and are transferred bodily to the biography of Antar. They date back to the 6th century. Most of the details must be imaginary, but they are skillfully contrived by a writer who knew the life of the desert Arab at first hand. The verses with which the volumes abound are in many cases undoubtedly Antar's. They are printed in italics in what follows. In any event, the book in its present form has been the delight of all Arabians for many centuries. Every wild Bedouin of the desert knew much of the tale by heart, and listened to its periods and to its poems with quivering interest. His more cultivated brothers of the cities possessed one or many of its volumes. Every coffee-house in Aleppo, Baghdad, or Constantinople had a narrator who night after night recited it to rapt audiences. The unanimous opinion of the East has always placed the romance of Antar at the summit of such literature. As one of their authors well says, "The 1001 Nights is for the amusement of women and children. Antar is a book for men. From it they learn lessons of eloquence, of magnanimity, of generosity, and of statecraft." Even the Prophet Muhammad, well-known foe to poetry and to poets, instructed his disciples to relate to their children the traditions concerning Antar, "for these will steel their hearts harder than stone." The book belongs among the great national classics, like the Shahnameh and the Nibelungenlied. It has a direct relation to Western culture and opinion also. Antar was the father of knighthood. He was the preux chevalier, the champion of the weak and oppressed, the protector of women, the impassioned lover-poet, the irresistible and magnanimous knight. European chivalry in a marked degree is the child of the chivalry of his time, which traveled along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea and passed with the Moors into Spain, 710. Another current flowed from Arabia to meet and to modify the Greeks of Constantinople and the early Crusaders, and still another passed from Persia into Palestine and Europe. These fertilized Provençal poetry, the French romance, the early Italian epic. The Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, that model of a heroic poem, was written early in the 11th century. Antar in its present form probably preceded the romances of chivalry so common in the 12th century in Italy and France. Antara ben Shedad el-Absi, Antar the lion, the son of Shedad of the tribe of Abs, the historic Antar, was born about the middle of the 6th century of our era, and died about the year 615, 45 years after the birth of the prophet Muhammad, and 7 years before the Hijrah, the flight to Medina, with which the Mohammedan era begins. His father was a noble Abyssinian knight. The romance makes him the son of an Abyssinian slave, who is finally discovered to be a powerful princess. His skin was black. He was despised by his father and family, and set to tend their camels. His extraordinary strength and valor, and his remarkable poetic faculty, soon made him a marked man in a community in which personal valor failed of its full value if it were not celebrated in brilliant verse. His love for the beautiful Ibla in the usual modern form, the daughter of his uncle, was proved in hundreds of encounters and battles, by many adventurous excursions in search of fame and booty, by thousands of verses in her honor. The historic Antar is the author of one of the 7 suspended poems. The common explanation of this term is that these 7 poems were judged, by the assemblage of all the Arabs, worthy to be written in golden letters, whence their name of the Golden Odes, and to be hung on high in the sacred Kaaba at Mecca. Whether this be true is not certain. They are at any rate accepted models of Arabic style. Antar was one of the 7 greatest poets of his poetic race. These suspended poems can now be studied in the original and in translation by the help of a little book published in London in 1894, The 7 Poems, by Captain F.E. Johnson, R.A. The Antar of the romance is constantly breaking into verse which is passionately admired by his followers. None of its beauties of form are preserved in the translation, and indeed this is true of the prose forms also. It speaks volume for the manly vigor of the original, that it can be transferred to an alien tongue, and yet preserve great qualities. To the Arab the work is a masterpiece both in form and content. Its prose is in balanced rhythmic sentences, ending in full or partial rhymes. This cadence of the cooing dove is pure music to an Eastern ear. If any reader is interested in Arabic verse, he can readily satisfy his curiosity. An introduction to the subject is given in the terminal essay of Sir Richard Burton's Arabian Nights, Lady Burton's edition, Volume 6, page 340. The same subject is treated briefly and very clearly in the introduction to Lyall's Ancient Arabian Poetry, a book well worth consulting on other accounts. The story itself appeals to the Oriental's deepest feelings, passions, ideals. "To realize the impetuous feelings of the Arab," says von Hammer, "you must have heard these tales narrated to a circle of Bedouins crowded about the orator of the desert. It is a veritable drama in which the spectators are the actors as well. If the hero is threatened with imminent danger, they shudder and cry aloud, 'No, no, no! Allah forbid! That cannot be!' If he is in the midst of tumult and battle, mowing down rank after rank of the enemy with his sword, they seize their own weapons and rise to fly to his rescue. If he falls into the snares of treachery, their foreheads contract with angry indignation, and they exclaim, 'The curse of Allah be on the traitor!' If the hero at last sinks under the superior forces of the enemy, a long and ardent sigh escapes from their breasts with the farewell blessing, 'Allah's compassion be with him, may he rest in peace!' Descriptions of the beauties of nature, especially of the spring, are received with exclamations. Nothing equals the delight which sparkles in every eye when the narrator draws a picture of feminine beauty." The question as to the exact relation of the chivalry of Europe to the earlier chivalry of Arabia and of the East is a large one, and one which must be left to scholars. It is certain that Spenser and Sir Philip Sidney owe far more to Saladin than we commonly suppose. The Tales of Boccaccio, 1350, show that the Italians of that day still held the Arabs to be their teachers in chivalry, and at least their equals in art, science, and civilization, and the Italy of 1300 was a century in advance of the rest of Europe. In 1268 two brothers of the King of Castile, with 800 other Spanish gentlemen, were serving under the banners of the Moslem in Tunis. The knightly ideal of both Moors and Spaniards was to be "like steel among swords, like wax among ladies." Hospitality, generosity, magnanimity, the protection of the weak, punctilious observance of the plighted faith, pride of birth and lineage, glory in personal valor, these were the knightly virtues common to Arab and Christian warriors. Antar and his knights, Ibla and her maidens, are the Oriental counterparts of Launcelot and Arthur, of Guinevere and Iseult. The primary duty of the early Arab was blood revenge. An insult to himself or an injury to the tribe must be wiped out with the blood of the offender. Hence arose the multitude of tribal feuds. It was Muhammad who first checked the private feud by fixing the price of blood, to be paid by the aggressor or by his tribe. In the time of Antar, revenge was the foremost duty. Ideals of excellence change as circumstances alter. Virtues go out of fashion, like the magnificence of Aristotle, or acquire an entirely new importance, as veracity, since England became a trading nation. Some day we may possess a natural history of the virtues. The service of the loved one by the early Arab was a passion completely different from the vain gallantry of the medieval knight of Europe. He sought for the complete possession of his chosen mistress, and was eager to earn it by multitudes of chivalric deeds, but he could not have understood the sentimentalities of the troubadours. The systematic fantasies of the courts of love would have seemed cold follies to Arab chivalry, as indeed they are, though they have led to something better. In generosity, in magnanimity, the Arab knight far surpassed his European brother. Hospitality was a point of honor to both. As to the noble Arabs of those days, when any one demanded their protection, no one ever inquired what was the matter, for if he asked any questions, it would be said of him that he was afraid. The poets have thus described them in verse: "They rise when any one calls out to them, and they haste before asking any questions. They aid him against his enemies that seek his life, and they return honored to their families." The Arab was the knight of the tent and the desert. His deeds were immediately known to his fellows, discussed and weighed in every household of his tribe. The Christian knight of the Middle Ages, living isolated in his stronghold, was less immediately affected by the opinions of his class. Tribal allegiance was developed in the first case, independence in the second. Scholars tell us that the romance of Antar is priceless for faithful pictures of the times before the advent of Muhammad, which are confirmed by all that remains of the poetry of the days of ignorance. To the general reader its charm lies in its bold and simple stories of adventure, in its childlike enjoyment of the beauty of nature, in its pictures of the elemental passions of ambition, pride, love, hate, revenge. Antar was a poet, a lover, a warrior, a born leader. From a keeper of camels he rose to be the protector of the tribe of Abs, and the pattern of chivalry, by virtue of great natural powers and in the face of every obstacle. He won possession of his Ibla, and gave her the dower of a queen, by adventures the like of which were never known before. There were no Ifrits, or genii, to come to his aid, as in the 1,000 Nights and a Night. Antar is the epic of success crowning human valor. The tales in the Arabian Nights, at their best, are the fond fancies of the fatalist, whose best endeavor is at the mercy of every capricious genie. The Arabian Nights contains one tale of the early Arabs, the story of Gharib and his brother Ajib, which repeats some of the exploits of Antar, a tale far inferior to the romance. The excellences of the Arabian Nights are of another order. We must look for them in the pompous enchantments of the City of Brass, or in the tender constancy of Aziz and Aziza, or in the tale of Hassan of Bassorah, with its lovely study of the friendship of a foster sister, and its wonderful presentment of the magic surroundings of the country of the Jann. To select specimens from Antar is like selecting from Robinson Crusoe. In the romance, Antar's adventures go on, and the character of the hero develops before one's eyes. It may be that the leisure of the desert is needed fully to appreciate this master work. The valor of Antar. Now Antar was becoming a big boy, and grew up, and used to accompany his mother Zebiba to the pastures, and he watched the cattle. And this he continued to do till he increased in stature. He used to walk and run about to harden himself, till at length his muscles were strengthened, his frame altogether more robust, his bones more firm and solid, and his speech correct. His days were passed in roaming about the mountain sides, and thus he continued till he attained his 10th year. He now kills a wolf which had attacked his father's flocks, and breaks into verse to celebrate his victory. "O thou wolf, eager for death, I have left thee wallowing in dust, and spoiled of life. Thou wouldst have the run of my flocks, but I have left thee dyed with blood. Thou wouldst disperse my sheep, and thou knowest I am a lion that never fears. This is the way I treat thee, thou dog of the desert. Hast thou ever before seen battle and wars?" His next adventure brought him to the notice of the chief of the tribe, King Zohair. A slave of Prince Shah's insulted a poor feeble woman who was tending her sheep, on which Antar dashed him against the ground, and his length and breadth were all one mass. This deed won for Antar the hatred of Prince Shah's, the friendship of the gentle Prince Malik, and the praise of the king, their father. "This valiant fellow," said the king, "has defended the honor of women." From that day both King Zohair and his son Malik conceived a great affection for Antar, and as Antar returned home, the women all collected around him to ask him what had happened. Among them were his aunts and his cousin, whose name was Ibla. Now Ibla was younger than Antar, and a merry lass. She was lovely as the moon at its full, and perfectly beautiful and elegant. One day he entered the house of his uncle Malik, and found his aunt combing his cousin Ibla's hair, which flowed down her back, dark as the shades of night. Antar was quite surprised. He was greatly agitated, and could pay no attention to anything. He was anxious and thoughtful, and his anguish daily became more oppressive. Meeting her at a feast, he addressed her in verse: "The lovely virgin has struck my heart with the arrow of a glance, for which there is no cure. Sometimes she wishes for a feast in the sand hills, like a fawn whose eyes are full of magic. She moves. I should say it was the branch of the tamarisk that waves its branches to the southern breeze. She approaches. I should say it was the frightened fawn when a calamity alarms it in the waste." When Ibla heard from Antar this description of her charms, she was in astonishment. But Antar continued in this state for days and nights, his love and anguish ever increasing. Antar resolves to be either tossed upon the spearheads or numbered among the noble, and he wanders into the plain of lions. As soon as Antar found himself in it, he said to himself, "Perhaps I shall now find a lion, and I will slay him." Then, behold, a lion appeared in the middle of the valley. He stalked about and roared aloud. Wide were his nostrils, and fire flashed from his eyes. The whole valley trembled at every gnash of his fangs. He was a calamity, and his claws more dreadful than the deadliest catastrophe. Thunder pealed as he roared. Vast was his strength, and his force dreadful. Broad were his paws, and his head immense. Just at that moment Shedad and his brothers came up. They saw Antar address the lion, and heard the verses that he repeated. He sprang forward like a hailstorm, and hissed at him like a black serpent. He met the lion as he sprang, and outroared his bellow. Then, giving a dreadful shriek, he seized hold of his mouth with his hand, and wrenched it open to his shoulders, and he shouted aloud. The valley and the country round echoed back the war. Those who were watching were astonished at his prowess, and began to fear Antar. The horsemen now set off to attack the tribe of Timim, leaving the slaves to guard the women. Antar was in transports on seeing Ibla appear with the other women. She was indeed like an amorous fawn, and when Antar was attending her, he was overwhelmed in the ocean of his love, and became the slave of her sable tresses. They sat down to eat, and the wine cups went merrily round. It was the spring of the year, when the whole land shone in all its glory. The vines hung luxuriantly in the arbors. The flowers shed around ambrosial fragrance. Every hillock sparkled in the beauty of its colors. The birds in responsive melody sang sweetly from each bush, and harmony issued from their throats. The ground was covered with flowers and herbs, while the nightingales filled the air with their softest notes. While the maidens were singing and sporting, lo, on a sudden appeared a cloud of dust walling the horizon, and a vast clamor arose. A troop of horses and their riders, some 70 in number, rushed forth to seize the women and made them prisoners. Antar instantly rescues Ibla from her captors and engages the enemy. He rushed forward to meet them, and harder than flint was his heart, and in his attack was their fate and destiny. He returned home, taking with him 25 horses, and all the women and children. Now the hatred of Semeia, his stepmother, was converted into love and tenderness, and he became dearer to her than sleep. He had thenceforward a powerful ally in her, a fervent friend in Prince Malik, a wily counselor in his brother Shibub. And Antar made great progress in Ibla's heart from the verses that he spoke in her praise, such verses as these: I love thee with the love of a noble-born hero, and I am content with thy imaginary phantom. Thou art my sovereign in my very blood, and my mistress, and in thee is all my confidence. Antar's astonishing valor gained him the praise of the noble Absian knights, and he was emboldened to ask his father Shedad to acknowledge him for his son, that he might become a chief among the Arabs. Shedad, enraged, drew his sword and rushed upon Antar to kill him, but was prevented by Semeia. Antar, in the greatest agony of spirit, was ashamed that the day should dawn on him after this refusal, or that he should remain any longer in the country. He mounted his horse, put on his armor, and traveled on till he was far from the tents, and he knew not whither he was going. Antar had proceeded some way, when lo! a knight rushed out from the ravines and the rocks, mounted on a dark-colored colt, beautiful and compact, and of a race much prized among the Arabs. Its hoofs were as flat as the beaten coin. When he neighed, he seemed as if about to speak, and his ears were like quills. His sire was Wasil, and his dam Hemama. When Antar cast his eye upon the horse and observed his speed and his paces, he felt that no horse could surpass him, so his whole heart and soul longed for him. And when the knight perceived that Antar was making toward him, he spurred his horse, and it fled beneath him, for this was a renowned horseman called Harith, the son of Obad, and he was a valiant hero. By various devices Antar became possessed of the noble horse Abjer, whose equal no prince or emperor could boast of. His mettle was soon tried in an affray with the tribe of Meon, headed by the warrior Nakid, who was ferocious as a lion. When Nakid saw the battle of Antar, and how alone he stood against 5,000, and was making them drink of the cup of death and perdition, he was overwhelmed with astonishment at his deeds. "Thou valiant slave," he cried, "how powerful is thine arm, how strong thy wrist!" And he rushed down upon Antar, and Antar presented himself before him, for he was all anxiety to meet him. "O thou base-born!" cried Nakid. But Antar permitted him not to finish his speech before he assaulted him with the assault of a lion, and roared at him. He was horrified and paralyzed at the sight of Antar. Antar attacked him, thus scared and petrified, and struck him with his sword on the head, and cleft him down the back, and he fell, cut in twain, from the horse, and he was split in two as if by a balance. And as Antar dealt the blow, he cried out, "O by Obs, O by Adnan, I am ever the lover of Ibla!" No sooner did the tribe of Meon behold Antar's blow than every one was seized with fear and dismay. The whole 5,000 made an attack like the attack of a single man. But Antar received them as the parched ground receives the first of the rain. His eyeballs were fiery red, and foam issued from his lips. Whenever he smote, he cleft the head. Every warrior he assailed he annihilated. He tore a rider from the back of his horse, he heaved him on high, and whirling him in the air, he struck down another with him, and the two instantly expired. "By thine eyes, Ibla," he cried, To-day will I destroy all this race." Thus he proceeded until he terrified the warriors and hurled them into woe and disgrace, hewing off their arms and their joints. At the moment of Antar's victory his friends arrived to see his triumph. On his way back with them he celebrates his love for Ibla in verses: "When the breezes blow from Mount Sadai, their freshness calms the fire of my love and transports. Her throat complains of the darkness of her necklaces. Alas, the effects of that throat and that necklace! Will fortune ever, O daughter of Malik, ever bless me with thy embrace, that would cure my heart of the sorrows of love? If my eye could see her baggage camels and her family, I would rub my cheeks on the hoofs of her camels. I will kiss the earth where thou art. Mayhap the fire of my love and ecstasy may be quenched. I am the well-known Antar, the chief of his tribe, and I shall die. But when I am gone, histories shall tell of me." From that day forth Antar was named Abul Fawaris, that is to say, the father of horsemen. His sword, Dami, the trenchant, was forged from a meteor that fell from the sky. It was 2 cubits long and 2 spans wide. If it were presented to Nushirvan, king of Persia, he would exalt the giver with favors; or if it were presented to the emperor of Europe, one would be enriched with treasures of gold and silver. As soon as Gaidak saw the tribe of Abs and Antar the destroyer of horsemen, his heart was overjoyed, and he cried out, "This is the glorious morning! To-day will I take my revenge!" So he assailed the tribe of Abs and Adnan, and his people attacked behind him like a cloud when it pours forth water and rains. And the knight of Abs assaulted them likewise, anxious to try his sword, the famous Dami. And Antar fought with Gaidak, and wearied him, and shouted at him, and filled him with horror. Then assailed him so that stirrup grated stirrup, and he struck him on the head with Dami. He cleft his visor and wadding, and his sword played away between the eyes, passing through his shoulders down to the back of the horse, even down to the ground, and he and his horse made 4 pieces. And to the strictest observer it would appear that he had divided them with scales. And God prospered Antar in all that he did, so that he slew all he aimed at, and overthrew all he touched. "Nobility," said Antar, "among liberal men is the thrust of the spear, the blow of the sword, and patience beneath the battle dust. I am the physician of the tribe of Abs in sickness, their protector in disgrace, the defender of their wives when they are in trouble, their horsemen when they are in glory, and their sword when they rush to arms." This was Antar's speech to Monsar, king of the Arabs, when he was in search of Ibla's dowry. He found it in the land of Irak, where the magnificent Khosrow was ready to reward him even to the half of his kingdom for his victory over the champion of the Emperor of Europe. "All this grandeur and all these gifts," said Antar, "have no value to me, no charm in my eyes. Love of my native land is the fixed passion of my soul." "Do not imagine," said Khosrow, "that we have been able duly to recompense you. What we have given you is perishable, as everything human is, but your praises and your poems will endure forever." Antar's wars made him a nocturnal calamity to the foes of his tribe. He was its protector and the champion of its women. For Antar was particularly solicitous in the cause of women. His generosity knew no bounds. Antar immediately presented the whole of the spoil to his father and his uncles, and all the tribe of Abs were astonished at his noble conduct and filial love. His hospitality was universal, his magnanimity without limit. "Do not bear malice, O Shibub! Renounce it, for no good ever came of malice. Violence is infamous, its result is ever uncertain, and no one can act justly when actuated by hatred. Let my heart support every evil, and let my patience endure till I have subdued all my foes." Time after time he won new dowries for Ebla, even bringing the treasures of Persia to her feet. Treacheries without count divided him from his promised bride. Over and over again he rescued her from the hands of the enemy, and not only her, but her father and her hostile kinsmen. At last, in the 4th volume, on the 1453rd page, Antar makes his wedding feasts. "I wish to make at Ebla's wedding 5 separate feasts. I will feed the birds and the beasts, the men and the women, the girls and the boys, and not a single person shall remain in the whole country but shall eat at Ebla's marriage festival." Antar was at the summit of his happiness and delight, congratulating himself on his good fortune and perfect felicity, all trouble and anxiety being now banished from his heart. Praise be to God, the dispenser of all grief from the hearts of virtuous men. The 360 tribes of the Arabs were invited to the feast, and on the 8th day the assembled chiefs presented their gifts: horses, armor, slaves, perfumes, gold, velvet, camels. The number of slaves Antar received that day was 25,000, to each of whom he gave a damsel, a horse, and weapons, and they all mounted when he rode out, and halted when he halted. Now when all the Arab chiefs had presented their offerings, each according to his circumstances, Antar rose and called out to Mokriol Wash, "O knight of Syria," said he, "let all the he and she camels, high-priced horses, and all the various rarities I have received this day, be a present from me to you. But the perfumes of ambergris and fragrant musk belong to my cousin Ebla, and the slaves shall form my army and troops." And the Arab chiefs marveled at his generosity. And now Ebla was clothed in the most magnificent garments and superb necklaces. They placed the coronet of Khosrow on her head, and tiaras round her forehead. They lighted brilliant and scented candles before her. The perfumes were scattered, the torches blazed, and Ebla came forth in state. All present gave a shout, while the malicious and ill-natured cried aloud, "What a pity that one so beautiful and fair should be wedded to one so black!" The selections are from Hamilton's translation. 2 long episodes in Antar are especially noteworthy: the famous horse race between the champions of the tribes of Abs and Fazara, Volume 4, Chapter 33, and the history of Khalid and Jaida, Volume 2, Chapter 11. End of Section 15. Recording by Leonard Wilson of Springfield, Ohio.